right, so we start off with texasrealestate.com, texasrealestate.com. There's the blank legal and ethics blank form downloads, and this is where all the forms are at. Every form you need is in here. Let's just do an example. Buyer. So there's the buyer tenant representation agreement. Every form you need is in there. There's over 176 of them. But this is on the buyer tenant representation agreement, right? And we're not going to fill this one out, but we are going to touch base on a couple things based on a conversation we had earlier. Obviously, party one, paragraph one needs to be completed. We all know that, right? That's simple. Definitions is another one that needs to be completed. Definitions is another one. I mean, not definitions, market area is our key area here. That has to be with boundaries. It tells you right there with boundaries. Everybody see that? So you have, it could be a city, a county, a school district, a subdivision. It could be a street, right? And, or a specific address even, because you have boundaries on all of those. Please do not use coastal Bend area, Corpus Christi and coastal area, Rio Grande Valley, or Cameron County and surrounding counties. Surrounding does what? We don't have boundaries there, right? We need to have a boundary on it. So make sure that's specific for that buyer. That could be whatever you and the buyer agree to. We have that one. Listing agreement. I'm sorry, the terms of the agreement can be whatever you want it to be. It could be 1 day, it could be 30 days, 6 months, a year. Investors, I used to use a year with them. And then I'm just going to hit some of the blanks. Intermediary status. Almost always, every one of them I've ever done, I've had intermediary status, yes. If there's a question about it, talk to them about it, make sure they understand what it is and that it's okay. Can I change any of this at any given time? And the answer is yes. There's a amendment to the buyer rep agreement. There's an amendment to the listing agreement, and then there's amendments for contracts. So you can change this if let's say they decide, like we've done it, where we've had them with a market area, Cameron County. When we start working with them, they decide they want to buy something in Hidalgo County. So we just do an amendment. So we have the paper trail to get us where we need to be, right? So we're good to go. When we're looking at the rest of this real quick, broker's fees. On the buyer side, one of the things going on nationwide is the buyer needs to be aware of what you're getting paid. It's no longer, not that it has ever been a secret, but the buyer needs to know. And it's recommended that you have a percentage in here and you talk to them about that and explain to them how that works. So for example, if I put 3% in here, it says here that I'm going to try to get that commission from the seller, landlord, or their agents. And in other words, the other broker. If that doesn't happen, then you would be responsible for it. That's a part that does get taken care of. So the other part of this on the buyer rep agreement is we are also responsible for making sure they're aware of for sale by owners or builder properties that are available in the market area they're looking. So the verbiage for that, because of when we're talking about commission, the verbiage for that is, and you can clean it up whichever way you want to. What I used to use is, if we run across a for sale by owner or a builder, an area where they're building new construction, and you want to take a look at it and you decide you like it, give me an opportunity to talk to them to see if they'll pay a commission. Because if they won't, then in accordance with our buyer rep agreement, you'll be responsible for that commission. And I don't really want to do that. That was me, right? I don't really want to do that. So what I would be willing to do is terminate the buyer rep agreement and let you go on your own. That's always worked for me. That's not my recommendation. That's not the way a lot of agents do it. But the first part of that is real important. Let me talk to them and find out whether they'll pay. Because the buyer needs to know that if they buy that for sale by owner and the for sale by owner is not willing to pay, the buyer will be responsible for that commission. That's what this says, right? So we need to make sure they know that. However, I will also tell you that if they refuse to pay it, or we're having a hard time getting it, the only one that's going to be able to fix that is the broker. We are not allowed to sue a buyer or seller, or as agents, we're not allowed to do that, right? So the broker is the only one that can get involved in that. I just want to touch base on a couple things on this, and that was the main purpose behind. This is the buyer tenant representation agreement. Days. The same thing goes here as what goes on the listing agreement. For me, I would recommend 30 days. No more than that, because there's things that have to happen. So Mr. Miss Buyer, if you don't buy something during the course of this agreement, I have to provide you with lists of properties you've seen while I was representing you. And if you buy one of those properties, then we would still be owed a commission. That's what this paragraph says. Unless our listing agreement, our buyer rep agreement terminates, expires, and they go with another Texas realtor, then I don't get anything. Right? It tells you all that right there in this paragraph. Now you have to do what works for you. And this is there for a reason, because sometimes buyers will go to sellers and sellers will say, wait till my listing expires and then I'll sell it to you for cheaper, right? That happens. And that's what this is there to protect us. If we brought the two parties together, we should still get paid. But again, if they list with another realtor, or if the buyer goes with another realtor after our terms have expired, we don't get anything anyway, right? So for me personally, I've never worried about that. I've told them that it's here, but we're not going to do that, because I have to provide to them a list of properties they've seen, or on the listing side, a list of buyers that have seen the property. And I don't have the time to do all that. Right. So I'm not worried about it. For me, that's always worked. You have to read it, understand it, make sure you know how to present it so that it doesn't have an impact on you, and make sure you have something to stand on in case that happens, because occasionally it does happen if you're going to get excited about stuff. All right, so then just a couple other little things on here is to make sure that on the bottom of it, where it says broker's printed name, that's going to be Remax Elite. And then of course, broker associates printed name, that's yours. And then you're going to highlight broker associates signature, and you will sign right here on this line, right? It has to be signed by you and them to make it an effective contract. Just like this is the buyer rep agreement, buyer tenant rep agreement. And it's just like a listing agreement. It doesn't have any impact unless both parties are signed. And please remember, everything we give them, everything they initial, everything they sign, so everything we present, initial or sign, they must get a copy of that. Is there a timeline in when you give them a copy? Not really. But again, you work it out for you. They are supposed to have a copy of it. If they were to go to Trek and file a complaint, Trek's going to ask them to send what they have copies of. And if they say, I don't have any copies, that's just going to add to it. Or if they send copies to them and they're not signed or filled out correctly, that's going to add to it, right? So we want to make sure we do things the right way. For myself, for us, the way we've done it over the years is we've scanned them in, throw them in Dropbox, and we'll send them a link so they have access to all the files. And as we go through the transaction, we add to that link and work from there, right? And you can do the same thing with Google Drive or Box Drive or Box or any of the other things like that. All right, anybody have any questions there? Questions?
Mac, do they have access to it when we send it through zip forms?
They do, but you'd have to tell them to save it, right?
Okay.
Also, like if you send it, if you're talking about for electronic signature, sure, what they should do, and in fact, on the screen it'll tell them they can save a copy, or they can get a copy afterwards. And most of the time they get a copy afterwards. At least that's been my experience. Very seldom do they ever save a copy when they sign it. But if you tell them to do that, they might do it. I just never mess with it because I always just threw it in Dropbox anyway. So, all right. Once again, we got those contracts that we went from TexasRealEstate.com, legal and ethics, blank form downloads, and then we have all these forms here Again, you have them in Spanish and Vietnamese as well. We can't use them as a contract, but we can lay them out there side by side so they can see what they say, and we have that to work from. In case they have questions about the contract and they read Spanish or Vietnamese better, then we can use that as a source, right? And not all forms are translated, but there's some in there that are. All right. 1 to 4 family contract. When we are working on the 1 to 4 family contract or any of the contracts, if it's a promulgated form, it'll tell you that it's promulgated. And on the top right, you'll have a date. That's the date that it become promulgated, the date that it become official. And that date is real important. Occasionally, as we change forms, you'll see me send something back, say, hey, this is an outdated contract. That's what I'm talking about. In fact, just what was it? I think I told Norma 2 weeks ago, we still had an agent using outdated forms, and it wasn't our, if I remember right, it wasn't our agent that wrote it. It was somebody else wrote it, but our agent accepted it. And we shouldn't do that, not without having a conversation with the client, because there may be things in there that are no longer valid as far as law goes when they change the contracts. So anyway, make sure you have the right one. We're going to run through this. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and we'll do what we can to make sure we have those, get those answers for you if you have anything. All right, so here on the parties, when we talk about the seller, landlord, we want to go with whatever's on the deed or the tax records are a good source for us. If there was a will, we need to make sure that the will was probated. In the county where the property's at. Any questions on that one? Buyers, how do we check the buyer's ID? What do we check? Driver's license, passports. Anything else? State ID if they don't have one of those. So we want to make sure that we have the buyer's correct name. And because the name has to be notarized, we want to make sure that it's the complete name the way it's supposed to be. And a lot of times if we don't ask the buyer, like when we're doing the buyer rep, ask them for their ID so that you make sure you copy it right from there. The other thing, let me throw that in here as well, for both sides, it has to be a valid driver's license, meaning it cannot be expired, right? Everything has to be then on parties, if there's more than 1 or 2 people, right? For those of you that are watching this, if there's more than 1 or 2 people and I can't fit them all in here, right here at the top where it says addenda, see where that paperclip is right there? If I click on that, it'll say add addendum. So I can go paragraph title, parties, for example, paragraph 1, and start adding their names to it. However many there is, right? And what that'll do is on the left-hand side of this, you see that little red arrow pop up there? That red arrow tells us that there's an addendum attached to it, other than the typical form addendum. And we'll see that at the end. That we want to use that because that creates a page for them to actually sign. And we can do that on any of these. Legal description, anything we have where it's outside of the box. It's not going to fit in that little blank right there. All we do is go up here and just click on that little paperclip and add to it, right? So we don't have any problems with it. This is on the 1 to 4 family contract. We're trying to make sure that we have that filled out correctly. All of us know that the very first thing we should have is information about brokerage services, and then the appropriate documents, buyer rep, listing agreement, and the forms that go with that, which I provided you a list of those forms. This is on the 1 to 4 family contract. We're just going to go through this fairly quickly. We want to hit some areas. I want you to watch this for just a second. We want to hit some areas where we need to talk to them about these items. So we're talking permanently installed and built-in items. That's improvements, permanently installed and built-in items. And it gives you a list of items to talk to them about. But then we also have accessories. And we want to become familiar with those, because we can talk all day long about them. But if we don't ask the right questions, we may not get where we need to be with it. Like, for example, if I walk through a house that has a window air conditioning unit in it, I will stop and ask the sellers, are you planning on taking that with you as a listing agent? And if they say yes, I want to make sure I put that on the listing agreement and on MLS. If I'm walking through as a buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent's the ones normally filling this out initially, if I'm walking through with a buyer's agent, I see a window unit in there, I'm going to stop and ask the buyer, hey, you notice AC is a window unit. If that's not conveying with the property, is that going to be a problem? And find out what their take is. And my experience has been it's going to be a problem. They want the AC unit to convey. Of course they do, right? So then I need to have that conversation with the listing agent to make sure that it is conveying. And then a couple other little ones on here is we have the above ground pool. Above ground pool. I'm almost certain that's not pertaining to kiddie pools. I'm pretty sure that's not pertaining to kiddie pools. But we've had homes where we've had the above ground pool, you know, the ones that are 48 inches and 15 feet and all that good stuff, with a deck around them. And they will leave the deck and take the pool. You know, today the deck probably costs more than the pool did, but they'll leave the deck and take the pool. So we need to make, again, we need to have that conversation. What's going on with this, right? So we don't have any problems, both on the listing side and on the buyer side. If I see it with a buyer, I'm going to ask a buyer, you notice the pool, if they're not leaving that, or is that a problem? Because it's an accessory, it's not a fixture. Does that make sense? We want to make sure that we have that conversation with them. And then software and applications is a real important part. Listing side, seller, you need to transfer the rights to all the software and applications. Ring doorbell, Nest system, Simply Safe, whatever it is you have, make sure it gets transferred. Are you okay with that? Yes. And buyer, here's the list of all the software. Here's a list of all the applications. Here's what we need to do. One of the ways of doing that is we need to make sure that access is available. So as a listing agent, we'll tell the seller, reset it to default. Reset everything to default. And then let's give all that information to the buyer. That way we don't have any issues. What we don't want to do is have the buyer move in and they can't make any adjustments because they can't get into the system. And we've had alarms that way where the seller did not reset the alarm. Buyer moves in, the alarm goes off, and we have no way of cutting it off, you know, without getting, in fact, in Los Fresnos, we had to wait for the seller to get back in touch with us so we could turn the stupid alarm off. And it wasn't our listing, but we had the buyer on it. Everything was supposed to have been shut off. So those things are going to happen, right? Just stay positive about it. If there's anything that's on the property the seller's planning on taking with them, we want to make sure that it gets included in this paragraph right here, retained by the seller. Make sure they're going to keep it, right? If you're walking through with the buyer and the buyer asks about something, Hey, how about that big screen TV in the living room? Do you think they're going to keep it or do you think it's going to stay? According to the contract, only the mounts stay. Only the mounts for it, right? And it tells you that right here. Only the mounts are going to stay. So if I'm walking through there with the buyer and they look at that big screen TV, or if there is a big screen TV, I might ask about it because I want to try to be proactive about it. Here, do you care about the TV that's in there? No, not really. Okay. Not a big deal. In that case, I want to make sure they take what they're going to, and if they take the mounts, they fix the holes. So that'll be a conversation again with the listing agent that you want to have as well. Be proactive. Here, on any questions on 2? Anybody? If you guys have anything, unmute, jump in, yell at me, throw it in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just run and roll, go through this. 3B is real important. Sum of all financing described. Is it possible to have 2 of these boxes marked at one time? Would it be possible?
I guess yes, maybe they're doing cash and financing. Or what are we talking about? 3?
Right. So cash
Okay.
does not on 3B, cash would not go in there. It's the sum
Okay.
of sum of all financing, but I appreciate you unmuting and jumping in there. There's a possibility that you have third party and seller financing. So they may be doing third party financing. We see this sometimes with conventional, for example, where they do a 80-10-10 or 80-15-5. So they're doing 80 loan. We're talking about the percentage of the loan, right? 80 is a loan and maybe 15 with owner finance and 5% down. And that gets them their 20% so that they don't have the PMI. So is it possible to have 2 of them marked? Yes, you could have third party and seller finance marked at the same time. And again, that's just, I throw that out just because that's a question that comes up from time to time. On paragraph, if you ever have any questions about that, please don't hesitate to ask. The lender is the one you should be having a conversation with when we talk about third party financing. We need to know what the lender is planning to do with the buyer. Always ask the buyer. You know, you talk to Debbie Joe over here with XYZ Finance. What does she tell you? Are you okay with that? Great. Let me give her a call right quick and get the details. And the reason for that is because sometimes what the buyer understands and what the lender actually said may be 2 different things, right? Because the lender's going to be throwing stuff out that may sound like jargon to them. And we want to make sure that we have the accurate information on the third party financing. If it's at night and you can't get hold of the lender, you can always do an amendment if you had to make changes to it. But know that when you present the offer and it gets accepted, it's being accepted at these terms. And if you change the terms, the seller always has the right to say, no, I'm not going to change. So doing an amendment is not a guarantee that things are going to go the way they're supposed to. On paragraph 4, we're talking about leases. We have residential leases. So if a property is a duplex, a single family, if the property is a single family being rented out, then 4A would be marked, right? If it's a duplex or if it's a fourplex and we have leases in there, these all need to be fixed. These all need to be, A needs to be marked and we need to have the leases attached, right? Because it says attached right there. Fixture leases. If you have a fixture lease and it gives you some examples of what some of those fixture leases could be, gives you examples of them. If you have any of those, again, the lease needs to be attached. So this box would need to be marked for that to work, right? And the same thing with natural resources. We don't see that one very often, and that's understandable. It's more the rural area than it is other places. But the first 2, I know doing contract compliance, I'm not seeing enough of those. And I know that agents are just skipping over it, and that could eventually create a mess. We don't want to do that. If the property is being leased out or has any of these fixed releases, we need to do it the right way and make sure this is in there. And of course, I'm not going to know that because I'm not there. I'm just assuming that those are not being done the way they probably should be, which is not necessarily a good thing. On 5A, we have delivery of the earnest money to within 3 days, and 3 days being the key. This is the title company only. Some of you won't get that, but that's a big deal. Some people like to put in personal names there, like whoever the title rep is, right? And when you do that, it says the buyer must deliver to. And if you put Susie in there, then that's who the money should be going to, is Susie. But it's not. It's going to the title company. And if there's a problem and one party decides to do something against the other party, Susie's going to be thrown right in the middle of that if they have a really good attorney. And we've talked about this over and over, but for some reason, some places it just doesn't get through. And at. So this is at. It says address right there. So that's the address for that title company. The address. I don't need title company and city because I have the city in the address, right? In fact, let me put that on here. Occasionally I'll see that, like Sierra Title in Brownsville. Da-da-da. If I put their address in here, it's going to say Brownsville, Texas, right? And then earnest money, and I don't mean to be sarcastic. Well, maybe I do. Not really. Earnest money is what goes in here. We talk about the earnest money. That's what goes in here, right? As earnest money. And then option fee goes in the second one. And today we don't have too many problems with that. That's working out pretty well. Please just make sure you understand what that is. And if you're looking for strengths and negotiating, option fee is that. But is the option fee refundable? Anybody can answer that. Is the option fee refundable? Anybody? Chat, unmute. Sandy.
I believe.
All right, you went dead. All I got was I believe. So the answer to the question, option fee is never, ever, ever refundable. Never refundable. Buyer will never see the option fee again. Can it be credited to the sell? Yes, absolutely. But they're not going to get it back if they terminate. And that is something that keeps popping up from time to time. Option fee is not refundable at all. Let's see. They're and you know, when it says 3 days, we know 3 days, unless it's a we're talking about days, right? So if the last day falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, then it's good until the next day, right? So if at 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, we actually get a contract, we've initialed signatures, and we communicate acceptance at 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, we have Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Well, Sunday, can't do anything with it. So we have until Monday, close of business, to get the option fee and the earnest money turned in. If Monday is a holiday, then we have until Tuesday, close of business, to get it in, right? By the contract. We don't have to do anything different. That's per the contract. And if some of this seems really elementary for some of you, I promise you, the more transactions you see, the more you'll see what I'm saying is so true. You have to educate the other side more often than not, because not everybody has training, and not everybody has a broker that looks out for them. You're going to have situations where the other agent's going to tell you, well, that's the way my broker does it. That's fine. That's not what the state contract says. And that's the way we're going to do it. All right, termination option for the consideration, right? That goes in there. Seller grants the buyer the unrestricted right. So the buyer can terminate the contract for any reason. It's the unrestricted right to terminate. That's what the option fee gives the buyer, but it has to be done by 5 p.m. local, where the property is located at. That part's really important. If the buyer gives the notice, we're going to terminate, right? And we want to make sure that that happens the way it's supposed to be. Let's see, there we go. Right here's the other one I was looking for just a second ago. Let me grab this one for you. Highlight that one. The option fee will be credited toward the sales price. So it doesn't get refunded, but it does go back to the sales price. So we have that there, right? This tells us if we don't do an option fee, then we don't have an option. We still have a contract, we just don't have an option. If you don't do earnest money, if the buyer fails to deliver the earnest money, then and on time, then the seller can terminate. We did 2 of those last year, one in Mission and one at the Island, where the seller terminated on the buyer. The market is where you can do that. I mean, this market, if you're not taking care of your buyer, you're up a creek. And the agent at the Island on the other side called, can't you do something, please? My buyer's going to be really mad. And hey, it's business. I'm sorry, just the way it goes. So please make sure you're doing it the right way. And if you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to ask. On this one, the title policy, again, this should be the same as what we have in 5A. It's the title company. That's what goes in there, right? And buyer or seller can pay for it. Normally it's the seller, right? That is a norm, and that's okay. But either one of them or both of them can pay for it. Not a problem. Here we want to do recommend. We are going to do amendments. And again, if I'm doing the contract, I'm going to say the seller, so I'm going to fill it out this way. We want to go with will amend shortages in the area. To do shortages in the area, we're going to need a survey. An existing survey with a T47 works, or a new survey, but you're going to need a survey to be able to do this. And most buyers ask for a survey. Not all. I worked with investors that never did, but most of them do. Shortages in area is really important. In both of our Facebook groups, we have that information in there, and as to what that applies to. If there's a shortage in the area and there's a problem, and we mark will not amend, then the buyer has no recourse because the title company has no obligation. If we mark will not amend. If we mark will amend, there's a charge. It's 5% of the title policy. So let's say a $200,000 house, title policy is about $1,000. 5% of that is what it costs. And you're giving them insurance in case something goes wrong with the shortages in the area. So it is something important to cover. On the survey, please remember that we have 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 1 is probably one of the better ones. However, we're talking about the existing survey. And so when we look at this, there's 3 parts to it. Just this paragraph, there's 3 parts. There's this part where we're going to get the survey, the existing survey, along with the T47, right? That's one part. Seller's going to give them the survey they have. That's good. We're okay. Not a problem. If the seller fails to do that, if the seller fails to do it, then the buyer can order one at the seller's expense, but no later than 3 days. If you wait until the day before closing, that part doesn't pertain. So no later than 3 days before. So if the seller says they'll provide one, but they don't, then the buyer is going to order it and the seller will pay for it per the contract. And folks, if you're the listing side and seller says they have a survey, get it at the listing appointment. Don't wait for a contract to come in. Because days here are really important because you have so many days right here to get that done. If we provide the existing survey, right? If the existing survey is not satisfactory, if it's not acceptable, then is when we'll decide who's going to pay for the new one. So there's 3 paragraphs there. You have regular type, bold type, and regular type. Those are 3 different paragraphs. Take them individually as you fill out that one. But number 1 is still good. The other thing with existing surveys is there's a movement out there where surveyors are saying they're copywritten, we can't reuse them. That's actually happening right now. That's more so up north than it is here. Objections, what goes in here? Anything special? Like, they want chickens. I can't even spell, whatever, chicks. There you go. They want chickens, they want boat. I told you I can't even spell that even. Chickens, boat, RV parking. Anything special, right? That's what would go in there. Because if there's a restriction where they can't do it, then they can get out of the contract. This is for the buyer. Do not. Then that's remember. How about remember? Remember, no. Yeah. What I mean by that, no, remember, no residential info. I don't need to have anything in here like for residential use because you're using the 1 to 4 family. And this says which prohibits the following use. And if it prohibits residential, we should probably be using the right contract, right? So know what you're getting into. What does sometimes show up here is if the investor is buying it to use as rental property, i.e. at condos sometimes, if the investor is buying it to use it as a rental property, there may be some restrictions on the rental. So we might want to include that in there so we get that information. And then always make sure that we have days in here, right? Always make sure we have days. All right. Homeowners insurance, we know that. We definitely want to touch base on that if there is one. That's HOA, POA, Property Owners Association. If either one of those apply, make sure that we mark that accordingly. Tidewaters, property condition. All properties in the state of Texas are sold as is. Here's a really good one for you. On the seller's disclosure notice. Seller's disclosure notice. If you're the listing agent, get the seller's disclosure notice uploaded into MLS. If you're not, if I'm representing the buyer, I want to get that before I write the offer. Get it before you write the offer, if at all possible, because you're giving them advice and opinions. How can you write an offer if you haven't seen the seller's disclosure notice? If I have to go with this one, and you have your days in here, please remember, if the buyer does not receive the notice, that notice, they can terminate the contract at any time prior to closing. If they do get the notice, they have 7 days after they receive it to terminate. So if I put 5 days in here from the effective date, and that's after the effective date right there, right? If I put 5 days in here, I've just given them a 12-day option period. In essence. Everybody okay? All right. Property is as is. All properties in the state, residential properties in the state of Texas are sold as is. I see buyers and sellers, and some of you submit contracts that way, and I'll put a comment on there that it wasn't needed. Like I had one, I think it was last week, it came out of Corpus Christi, they wrote in there, buyer is buying the property as is, or seller is selling the property as is. You don't need it. We already know that, right? We've got that. Here's if there's any treatments. Anything you know needs to be fixed. Like a broken window. Anything you know that needs to be fixed. If I see a mud tunnel going up the side of the foundation, I think it's probably termites, but I don't know that. So I can't put that on there. Right? Because I'm not a termite inspector, pest control, I don't do that. But from experience, I know that's probably what it is. So I want to make sure the buyer gets a pest inspection. We're destroying insect inspection, right? But anything you know needs to be fixed. A broken window, a hole in the wall, broken door, whatever it is. If you know it needs to be fixed and the buyer wants it, you can put it on there. Honestly, I try not to do that. I'd rather negotiate price and terms and negotiate repairs during the option period than try to negotiate price, terms, and repairs, and then turn around and negotiate repairs again, personally. Residential service contract, make sure that if your buyer wants that they get a chance to order that. Talk to them about it, make them aware of it. That's one of the changes we're making in the walkthrough form is that specific item to make sure that the buyers are aware that they had a chance to get one and that it was ordered. If you are an agent and you're involved in it, you need to disclose that. Most of us know that. That's not a problem. Closing dates, usually 30 to 45 days out. Closing and funding, possession, we know that. Special provisions, only material facts, and business details. This something like that. Oh, if this, then that, right? We should be good to go there. We should be good to go. This, then that. The reason I say that is, like, for example, in special provisions, if I said seller will install new carpet if buyer will do this. That's if this, then that, right? That doesn't work. We don't put that in there. Just material facts and business details. Following expenses, these are seller's going to pay the buyer's closing costs. Anything that goes with that, that's going to have to come from the lender. Make sure you know what the lender's offering right there before you actually put that in there as far as what they're going to pay. Talking about prorations, escrow. You will on occasion hear me say, take a look at paragraph 15. And 18. Sometimes when you text me or call me for, say, hey, I have this situation, I'll say, tell your client to read paragraph 15 and 18. 15 is if they fail to comply with the contract, buyer or seller. If the seller fails to comply, or if the buyer fails to comply, here's what can happen. Have the client read that. If I had a client that calls me and says, I'm having a problem, I want to terminate the contract, I normally would say, hey, read this and I'll be over there tonight at 6 o'clock. We can sit down and talk about this. And it gives them that option. This one on the escrow side of it is if any damages part of it is what we're looking at, 18D. If one of them refused to sign the release for the escrow. So seller's mad, says, I'm not going to sign the release of earnest money for the buyer. I don't think they deserve it. Okay, well, that's your choice. Take a look at paragraph 18D in the contract, and I'll be over there 6 o'clock tonight. We'll talk about it. Because if they refuse to do that, they could be responsible for earnest money, reasonable attorney fees, and all costs of the suit. Most of the time, if you ask them to do that, that'll fix the problem, and they're good to go. Notices, we do not need names. They're in paragraph 1, where we had parties. We do need address, phone number, fax, email, that stuff, right? But we do not need their names. They're already there. And then make sure you mark the party, mark what applies back here. If it's third-party financing or whatever addenda there is, please mark that. What we don't want here is anything that was one-on-one. IABS, that's one-on-one. Buyer's buyer rep agreement, that's one-on-one. We don't need that. That's between you and your client. Non-royalty items addendum could go on here, but check with the lender, see what they recommend, right? Because it is supposed to be a part of the contract, so we probably want to include it. Contact an attorney. If they're going to contact an attorney, leave blank unless they have one. Leave a blank unless they have one. We don't need to write in there buyer's choice, seller's choice. It is the buyer's attorney and the seller's attorney. So of course it's going to be their choice. I don't get that, but I see those from time to time. Buyer's choice, seller's choice. We don't need it. Please don't do that. We don't need it. And then the effective date of the contract is the date. We have initials, signatures. Signatures and communication. That should have stayed in there. Yep. You have to have initial signatures and you communicate acceptance. That's your effective date, right? So we're good to go there. And then back here on the back page, last part of this, we want to make sure that if we are both in the same company and you have a buyer rep agreement and I have a listing agreement, then we'd be seller and buyer as intermediary. As long as they authorized it on those two forms, listing agreement, buyer rep agreement, which means we'd also need to have the consent for intermediary, right? Which would go with this. If I represent the seller and it's somebody from another company, then they would go on the other side over here. If your buyer, you're working with the buyer and the buyer says, I don't need representation, then we would still be seller only. Even though both of us are coming from within the company, my information would be here, your information would be down here. That's still doable. That's still what we do. If the buyer says they don't want representation. But we should have that conversation with them before we ever get there. And then back here, this is an area that's of concern. Title companies are receiving the earnest money, but not putting a time on there. And if it's not received by 5 p.m. on the third day, then the buyer didn't get it there on time. The seller can terminate the contract if he can terminate before they get it. So if it's due in on Monday at 5 and it's not there, and he gets it there Tuesday at 9, we're okay. Unless at 8 o'clock, the seller sent over a termination notice, and then the buyer's out, right? And then, like I said, that's what we did. We did 2 of those last year. So, any questions about the 1 to 4 family contract? Anybody? Going once, going twice. All right, so here's what I'm going to do just real quick so that you have this. Let me see. We are going to just a minute here, just a minute. Open this up just a second. So in the chat is a copy of the contract we just filled out for this course. It's got us the 1 to 4 family, everything we covered since we started here an hour ago. Anybody have any questions or comments? Nope. Let me do one thing, make sure that I have this correctly. Sure I didn't. Show you one thing on this, I think. Yes. So. Yep. You see the sheet that's on the screen? That's that addenda. Remember when we were in paragraph 1 for the parties, we had the extra names and we clicked on the little paper clip at the top. That's that addenda. That's what will open up. And that gets added to the form. It's the last page every time you use it. And it could be for address. It could be whatever you wanted to add to it. Rather than doing an exhibit, you're just going to attach that and it will cover over. It'll have the property on there because you'd have that listed on there anyway. And you'd have everybody sign off on it, just like you would the contract. Cool. Questions or comments? Nope. All right. Well, if you have anything, you can always shoot me a text or an email. I'll do what I can to help you. I wish you all the best, and I'll get all these uploaded tonight so you have them as well. Okay?
Thank you, Mac.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. You guys have a good one.
Thank you. Matt,
Yes, ma'am.
where can I, like, if my client wants to put in an offer, where can I find an offer, a form to submit?
That's the 1 to 4 family contract.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Yep. Anybody have anything else? Okay. Have a good one. Rise.